Welcome back to the Arbitrage.Run show with your host Donkey Teeth, joined as always with Kevin from Arbitrage Racing. And I just brought you up right away this time, Souls, since we've teased this show. New member of the show, Souls Vanish. What's happening, Souls?
Yeah, guys, what's going on?
Not much. We got a big announcement. This just got dropped right before we clicked record, so we had to shuffle up the agenda here. Of course, we're gonna try to get to the XP discussion on the buying and selling of XP. That sounds like it's coming in the future. But let me just pull up the announcement that was just dropped here. Exciting stuff going on. We're going to have conditional level-based tournaments in all classes now. So I just pulled it up here on the screen. Kevin, what are your thoughts here on this? Pretty cool, right?
Yeah, it's kind of what we've been waiting for a while, right? It breeds life to a whole bunch of new horses. So it's going to be fun. I'm curious to see a little more details on it. I mean, it sounds like they left it pretty open-ended, but we've been waiting on this for a while. Should add a lot of fun to the game.
Yeah, so I as far as how it reads to me, we're just going to have essentially what we've had in class 1 in the other classes, where it's been level 501 to 525, and then it was 501 to 550, and they just recently shifted it over to 526 to 550. So it doesn't really clarify. I know that they're live now. I haven't looked yet. Maybe you have, Kevin, since you're always racing. Is it just like in class 2, is it going to be 401 to 425, or are they going to segment twice? Because it's a smaller class, right?
I only see it to 425, at least early on. So
yeah, it probably makes sense.
Giving life to those breeds you'd have that you're mad because they land in the bottom of the class. It's going to be great. Gives you ability to do paid racing.
And it looks like it's going to be rotating, kind of like if people have been paying attention to the highest conditional in class 1, the 551 to 575, it rotates from distances right now. Sounds like that's what it's going to be like in the lower classes to start, right?
Yeah, I think it's by funnel. Like they have one for each funnel, and then it's going to rotate on some cycle around that.
Second announcement here, Souls, and I don't know if you've had a chance to read this one over, but we've got flash tournaments coming. This one, I mean, we kind of knew that that other conditional level thing was coming based on stuff that Facundo and Ryan have said in social media and kind of teased it. But this one is kind of out of nowhere, and it seems awesome. I mean, there's a guide that we probably need to read through a little bit more, but free racing events, so you don't have to pay for it, and they're just going to pop up, and you're not going to have any notice, is essentially what I'm reading here, huh, Souls?
Yeah, I mean, it does look like that. I mean, the frequency or, I don't know if it definitely says how often or kind of, I know that the paid schedule is kind of resuming on Thursday, but of next week. But, I don't know if they're going to overlay with that. But it'll be interesting to see how these go.
Yeah, it's something different, which is what, everybody's been asking
for. Yeah, that's
for.
it, right?
Here's the payout structure. Looks like it's going to be, when these do pop up, $8,000 prize pool, $3,200 going to class 1, $1,600 class 2, all the way down to $500 in class 6. So there's a guide here. Everybody should go check it out. There's not a ton here, but get a little bit more detail. I don't think we'll know exactly what the heck's going on until the first one pops up, huh?
Yeah, the first thing that popped up to me was thinking we just came out with these lower quarter class structures. It makes sense that one of the early tournaments might be like a 401, 425 for that class.
I think it does say that in here.
Yeah,
I think it says conditional. Well, I think it'll be all kinds of different stuff, but it does say conditional level brackets. Yeah,
right. I think that would be a great early tournament just to breathe even more life into that.
Agreed. Any other thoughts here on the flash tournaments or the conditional level-based stuff, Souls, before we move on?
No, I mean, conditionals are good. I think that helps people. Also, there's a little more incentive to move up in class, right? You're going to be protected for that first 25 levels at least. So I think it's all these little things that are going to start adding up to, a lot of us are on the fence about leveling up certain horses. And I think as we learn more and see, that some people are going to start slowly jumping over that fence and testing the waters. So
Well,
Yeah,
and it's kind of a framework for the conditional tournaments too, which Facundo has said is coming, which that'll be a big incentive to class up, which Kevin has talked about. Potentially will move Marajo up once that's announced, right?
yeah, possible. I think it also gives good incentive or a little more incentive to breed, because you don't have that. I mean, right now it was kind of death if you got like a 401 to 420, right? You're either gonna spend a ton, lose a ton, grinding up to where you can make money, or you were just going to do freeze and take forever to do it. So now you have a bit more of an out in that first quartile.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to keep this show moving along because we've gone so long on the last two and want to make sure we get to this XP discussion. But so one of the things after we released that last show, and I don't know if you caught it or not, Souls, but we went over a bit. I don't remember what the context was, but we started talking about the potential to seed races, which I don't think we were the first people to bring that up. I know ZSim had that in his slew of Zed ideas. And Kevin threw out the idea there to incentivize people to race up in these tournament qualifiers for buys, potentially creating buys to not have people wanting to finish lower in tournament standings on these daily tournaments or weekly tournaments or whatever. So somebody in the community, and I'm not going to say who, but they came out and they basically accused us of I don't know, trying to line our own pockets. There was kind of a tweet thread here talking about how larger stables are now populating the lower classes and have this new tactic to try to get seeding, and saying that we want top 24 that qualify to get buys or guaranteed payouts and guaranteed into the semifinal entry. And that this is how we as large stables concentrate our schemes to grab Ethereum. And then this thread went on to say that it's like we're sitting around all day figuring out how to benefit only ourselves with no regard for the rest of the game or the system, and we only care about ourselves and don't see how destructive it is to the entire game. So personally, I try not to be too sensitive, especially to things I see out on social media, because if you are, you drive yourself crazy, right? But I certainly don't think that is ever the spirit of anything that we talk about on this show. And I certainly know when we talk outside of this show in private, that's not the spirit of anything that we discuss. And I hope anybody that's listened to or watched this show from the start could go back and see that the whole idea of this show was community and trying to share the information that we have and the resources that we have and open up our stable to, when breeding 2.0 was so important to have top tier horses, to, share that with the community. So I take a little bit of offense, even though I'm not sensitive to somebody questioning our integrity and our intentions. Kevin, I'll let you comment next and then kick it over to Souls for his thoughts.
No, I think you nailed it. It was a pretty good tweet. It checked a lot of the boxes if you're playing like Zed Bingo, right, for Twitter. It had
Clickbait.
the good conspiracy theory. It had some big stable versus small stable elements, and then it had the nice thread attached, which we all love. So I don't know, but I mean, you nailed it. I think it was definitely, whoever said it, either was kind of headline hunting, or they just didn't watch our entire episode. Because if you actually watched, that was like one of, I think, 4 scenarios we laid out. I think immediately after it, I even mentioned that variety is king, right? So I was simply saying there needs to be some tournament where you actually want to win and qualify well. So like what a concept. And I think there'd actually be some good benefits of what people are complaining about right now, at least in the week-long one that had 384 in each group. One of the complaints was the beasts were just farming like 60 races the whole time. Well, you know how you prevent that is you actually make it rewarding to finish at a threshold that is harder for them to achieve. So if you have a threshold of like, if Race at Boom is sitting in 18th and we're early on, or maybe even like top 10 early on, and I know there's a big reward for finishing top 24, I'm not going to be farming the $5 freeze. I'd go maybe more to 6 gate to get that XP. So there's ancillary benefits that benefit the entire ecosystem that this person, I mean, they didn't put much thought into the tweet. I think as soon as they they heard what they wanted to hear, they kind of shut down, which is classic for a lot of the big stable, little stable discussion. We just got to get out of that mindset. I mean, obviously, like why would we waste our time with this show if that was our mindset? It was just a very, very shallow and disappointing tweet, quite frankly.
Souls, thoughts there?
No, it's obviously, that's Twitter. It's stuff when the integrity comes into question, and we've all, since the beginning, many of us have always put that like community first, and we know that if the game succeeds, like that's going to be more successful for all of us than anything that can happen to us in the short term. And if the game fails, then we obviously lose the most as well. So we're certainly like always mindful, of kind of being guardians for the game in a sense. And on the exact topic, I think there's pros and cons, but also we have to think that like, does it benefit everybody? It's probably a wash on the benefit versus, each of it, especially like you said, which was I was going to bring up, right? A lot of us are running our horses way more than the amount we needed to qualify, because we knew no matter what we did, we were going to qualify those horses. But when you see the dailies that are like, or even this 3-day, that was only 48 horses, like once we hit that threshold, a lot of our horses, we just locked up. We stopped running them because one race could have made the difference. So there are pros and cons, I think, to that. Which way it would fall on the fence, I don't necessarily know, but there's certainly no ill will towards the community as a whole within this group.
And you would never do that format every single week, right? That's right. The main takeaway. It is as much of a part of the game as like wanting to win as a pity point would be for a different type of horse, or as a 357, shout out to Dan Shan, would be if you want just a random lotto tournament, right? Like there needs to be different tournaments with different intentions and very like deliberate intentions with the variety they provide. Thanks for watching the show though. I do appreciate that.
And the discussion, like I always like when facts or discussions are brought up, maybe it's always tough when your intent is assumed when it's not the truth, right? But the discussion around that is always a good discussion to have, right? Around any decision that's made, why, and that benefits and the pros and cons of, that type of format. They could add an extra 12 horses essentially by giving 12 a buy, something like that. But that's all I have to say.
Yeah, and we're happy to have these types of conversations, and I think that's exactly it. Souls, is like there's in my world a right way and a wrong way. If you like tag us and say, hey, you guys talked about this, I think it's a terrible idea for this reason, and this reason, and then we can come back and say, well, yeah, you're actually that you make a good point or counterpoint here, and that's how you have constructive conversations and have a healthy community that hopefully attracts other people. Like, hey, these people are civil and intelligent, and I want to be part of this. That's what we're trying to build here, right?
Yeah. This wasn't meant to be that. I think they knew what they were doing. I mean, it was clickbaity, is what it was.
Yeah. So anyway, somebody else in the thread, we actually did get there was a little bit of support in the thread for us, and some good points made. Like in any other game or sport, like you don't see, for instance, the Chiefs and the Bills playing in the first round of the NFL playoffs this year, right? It's like you want that to be the conference championship. You want to see the good horses face off in the later rounds. At least I would think that would be the spirit, if but I get the other side too. Like you don't want other horses to not have a chance, but I don't think that that's the result of this idea. I guess we'll leave it there, huh, guys?
Yeah. There's always balance, right? But
yeah. Okay, Souls. So two reasons we wanted to bring you on again. Of course, you're probably going to be a regular guest along with Keith because everybody loves you guys. But we wanted to circle back on the conversation about power creep from the breeding debate that you had with Keith. You made some really clear points. I think it spoke to a lot of people in the community, and actually I think it may have changed a lot of people's perspectives regarding breeding 3.0. But then there's another segment of the community that maybe it didn't quite fully resonate with when you're talking about how power creep and breeding 2.0 was going to ruin the game, and the why of why nobody would want to breed with any Genesis Nakamoto's, whatever it is, 12 months down the road. There's just that, there were some threads out on Twitter, respectful, questioning how that was going to play out, and not really clear on, while it made sense what you were saying, like the actual details of it, I think. And you were in those threads. I think you read through them. So if you can add maybe a little bit more color on, the data that you and Vinny were seeing on your end. And of course, we don't know exactly how it was going to play out, right? And to what degree, but how you envisioned it playing out. What was a certainty and what are you speculating on here?
Yeah, I mean, there were probably, there's a lot of ways to solve issues or change things, right? And make a sustainable game. Thinking of it from one perspective never works, right? Like the team's clearly thinking of it from all of the perspectives, and that's very tough, right, to balance all of that. And it's going to take a lot. Every game has it, like a lot of balance change. This big one was needed, although when we now think about it, it wasn't like as big as we really feel, right, because the distance preference and variance stayed the same, but a large kind of pull the band-aid off change was needed like this to set it straight. And then we're going to see a lot of small balance changes, I think, over the lifetime of Zed. As something gets too powerful, like this is what happens. They nerf it, and so that everybody doesn't kind of hone in on that one thing and have to do that one thing. You want to be able to have options. In terms of the longevity, how it would have exactly played out if we didn't change anything, seemed kind of written on the wall. Like had already seen it. I mean, I think if we looked at like horses over 550 in level, I think there's like 120 Genesis that are over 550. I think 119 actually, and legendary and exclusive are like 150 now. So there's more legendary and exclusives over 550 than Genesis. So for anybody saying like the top echelon wasn't getting passed, I mean, clearly they were. Maybe the top like 5 horses, right? Because they were distance preference and the way distance preference passed on, but they would eventually get passed as the BA got strong enough to overpower the distance preference pass down. But
you want them to get passed, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think you guys, of the legendaries, I think you either bred or owned somewhere close to 15%, I think, of the legendaries over 550. So like, and most of those were probably for the first 3 months of breeding 2.0, we didn't even really know what was happening, right? But then towards the end, we knew like what was good, what the combos were. I didn't look at when exactly all those were bred, but I imagine a lot of them were bred towards the second half of breeding 2.0, and that was only going to escalate. And that's at the very, very top, right? So that makes, a ton of horses, all, that goes all the way down the chain, if we're just looking at 550. So that's where I kind of saw it going. And I'm not going to, obviously we joined up with you guys, and there's a lot of reasons to that, right? But, that certainly factored in on it, where we knew there was going to be this consolidation of power.
Well, I guess to try to get at what I think people are maybe uncertain about is, so I know some people said, well, aging can solve that. Like aging and breeding 2.0, maybe slightly tweaked, can solve it. And I guess that you kind of got at that at the start of what you were saying there. Like there probably are a lot of different ways that it could be addressed, but aging, I guess the part that's unclear to me is like when you get way down the lines here and you got these 268s that you continue to stack and stack base ability in, and eventually you have these like a exponentially growing supply of 268s that are better than like 95 to 99% of like Genesis Nakamoto's once that base ability gets high enough? Is that kind of what you were getting at? Because like aging will age them out.
Aging won't do it, and aging I think is more about the racing aspect, and I don't think as far as racing, like the power creep was more about the breeding, where you had to keep breeding each month to keep up, even, right? And even if you had bought one of those breeds, in terms of racing, you'd be one of 300 horses, like 550 plus. But in terms of breeding, you could never keep up because you would have one horse that was that really strong horse, right? Even if you bought a breed from you guys, whereas one horse doesn't do anything for you. You have to breed that very best horse with another very strong horse. So you need two of them. So even if you matched up with somebody else, you're only getting half of the breed a month, where stables at the top who have, say, 9 horses, they can, because of the way lineage works and whatever, they can breed in perpetuity the best horse every single cycle. So you very quickly, even if you got one of those top horses, you would very quickly fall behind in the breeding, the way it worked, as well. So aging wouldn't really, aging solves the racing problem, but not necessarily the breeding problem. There is breeding decay, but it's not strong enough to impact anything at the legendary level.
Now, if they changed breeding decay and cut that down, whatever, 66% or something like that.
I don't know, because even at Pacer with 4, you were like, the way BA was working, you still had a better than 1 in 4 shot to, like, I think, improve the BA, right? So I don't even think at 4 it necessarily would have cut the supply enough to stop the top stables from continuously, like, gaining ground on everybody else.
Yeah, it would have slowed it though, right?
Yeah. And power creep, when you're playing, power creep is awesome. Users love it in a sense, right? But it does, in a PvP aspect, they love it until they fall behind too much and then they stop playing the game. In a player versus like a PvE where you play against a game, that's fine because nobody cares if the enemies who are NPCs get killed faster. Like, that's a fun aspect. But when you're playing against other people, everybody hates when, the top people in the game leave everybody behind much, much faster.
Yeah, and I guess that there were certainly ways to, if you look at Kevin, who was it? Is it Glue Baby that bred Blummel, and is it Victory Fungus? Was that the other one?
Yeah, Rage Hammer, and then Glue Baby manages it for him. But I think Rage Hammer bred it.
So they claim to have cracked the code, and I mean, hard to deny that with those two awesome breeds. So there were ways, even at that, right? Like, we were growing our army exponentially every month. It was insane. Like, we had really, the decisions to make were absurd every single cycle, and it was just getting more and more. So yeah, I hear what you're saying there, Souls, and I guess I agree that they probably could have been solved with different ways that these people are suggesting. Maybe you severely tweak breeding decay and just a small tweak to 3.0 or something like that. But I guess your point remains that it was out of control and something had to be done. And this was the choice that they made, that they saw most fit for the Racing 2.0 that they were creating, right?
And as a whole, right? Because sometimes you fix one thing, right? But you don't necessarily think about it from every aspect where something else breaks. So yeah, can you deal with certain things in many manners? Yes, but then holistically, you need to deal with everything and make sure nothing is exploitable. And obviously, one of the big parts of things for players is to think through, and how do I optimize what I'm given? So it's tough to think about all of those things. So I definitely saw some ideas that could have solved for that, but some of them I immediately saw other opportunities that I would have exploited very quickly.
Yeah. And I guess another counterpoint that you hear to this discussion, because like part of it is like, yeah, 95% of all Genesis, like you didn't want to breed with already, maybe higher than that, right? It was like there was like 100 horses in Genesis studs in the game that you were interested at the end of breeding 2.0 once you had this sample built and you saw what worked and what didn't, and you saw what you could get from the top legendaries and even exclusives and even 268s. But at the same time, part of that issue is the racing system, right? So like we don't know how it would have shifted and shaped up in the context of racing 2.0, right? Which is somewhat of a valid point.
Yeah, we don't know how it would have, been, but I don't know if it really does it change that much. I mean, should I want to, they've said for a long time, and we as a player base have asked for it to bring value back to the Genesis. And does it make sense that, there were pacers who had originally been bred with 268 pacers and then been bred like 4 times and were C1 horses that I'd rather breed with over Genesis, Finnies, or even Zabos, and even some Nakamotos. So, and that wasn't a thoughtful breed. Like it was just smashed with BA. So, we all ask for the value to be brought back to Genesis, but then we're going to say, yeah, but we want hundreds of pacers to be wanted to breed with over Genesis. It's
Yeah.
tough one.
I think we've hit on most of it here. Kevin, any thoughts on this or any other questions for Souls on this topic?
No, I think he's touched on everything. He's the expert here. I'll stay in my lane.
Well, speaking of your lane, I mean, your lane is really everything, Zed. Who are we kidding? But we're going to talk about XP here. We've teased it on the past couple shows. Facundo has talked about it. Sounds like it's coming. This future buying and selling of XP from other players in Zed, not from VHS or Zed themselves, and only a portion. It sounds like a portion of your XP that your horse earns would be eligible to either be applied to another horse in your stable, it sounds like, or sold on a secondary market to somebody else that wants to level up their horse quicker than they otherwise might have. So, Kevin, off the bat, like, what's your initial reaction to this concept? Is it too much in the direction of a pay-to-win type model? What do you think about it?
No, I mean, I like it. I think we touched on it a little bit a few episodes ago, where it's good to have like value generated in different ways, right? So that person who loves to grind can make money off the person who has money and doesn't really want to grind. They can take the XP. Obviously, I think the devil will be in the details here. How do they structure it in a way where you can't just straight up buy your way to the top with XP? But I think the concept works if they can implement it correctly.
Souls, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same. I think that, obviously they need to implement it right, and I do know that they said they're going to have caps on how much you can buy, and it'll be kind of based on how much you race, like a multiple of how much you race, probably somewhere between 1 and 5x, that they'll land on. So you will be able to buy more than you race, which I think is okay because you still have the more you race, the more you can buy, right? So the casual guy who races once a week on Saturday, right, is only going to be able to buy that, say, 3 times that amount. Whereas if you do grind every day, you could still outpace that.
I wonder how they're going to do lending with that, because technically your horse is the one accumulating XP. So does that go to you, or does it go to the stable that's actually running it?
Yeah, that's a good. I mean, I don't know how it's going to work.
You almost need that in the lending contract, right? A XP split.
Yeah, right. Let's add more complexity to it.
Yeah, like some of it is for the horse, right? Yeah, but maybe that secondary. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Any concerns about this, Souls?
Concerns? I mean, no. I think it's going to take balance. Do I think the first iteration is going to be perfect? Probably not, because there's always things that come out, and then you start looking at it, and especially kind of how with aging or whatever, like you can essentially use this in a way to stunt your horse or accelerate your horse through certain levels. right? So if I'm at 525, say, and I want to slow down because I want to be part of that conditional, I can sell the bulk of my XP until I hit 526 and then buy a ton. And, there's going to be a lot of game theory that goes on around when you buy, when you sell, moving it between horses. Like, I think it's a lot of good decisions and it adds to the strategy of the game. Like, I think anything that adds to the strategy of the game is better because unlike a regular video game, we don't have like actual control over the horse in the race right now. Our strategy is like from a management perspective. And so the more we can add around that, like the more I get excited about it.
You're not controlling your horses? Kevin he tells me to hit that turbo boost at 700.
Dude, I'm in jockey mode every time.
AB, just
cheat code. Okay, here's a fun question here for you, Souls. Price prediction. Where do you think the price settles in? Like let's say a month after you can buy and sell XP. What's let's say 100 XP going to be going for, or 1,000 XP?
I think it was an easier question when there was rake, because in a sense it was minus free races, because we don't know what'll happen with free races. I think they need to stunt that like really hard, but and that be like the least amount tradable or something. And then the most would obviously be like a Genesis, Nakamoto, and C1. Like they should get the most and be able to trade the most and whatever. But when there was rake, if theoretically you stacked a race, you knew how much XP for that dollar you would get, right? Like the XP of the whole race based on the rake. So the 10%, and then the 250s were like the most optimal. So that would have been the price. In theory, you could do a little better if you had a better racehorse, but like that was like the price that I would have settled on. Now that rake's gone, it's a race to the bottom, but obviously we know rake will come back at some point, and I think that will determine the price of XP to some degree. Yeah,
race to the bottom, but there's always going to be demand to some degree.
Yeah, but like it won't go to zero, but if there's no rake, there's no XP's free, right? Like you can go, like in theory, you could, if you had a break-even horse or whatever, like the XP, or did have all the horses in a race with no rake, all that XP doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah, there's the cost that the horse that's winning that XP is no longer going to be the more that if you're selling it all and not applying it, it's no longer going to be able to generate that revenue source.
Might fall behind or something. Yeah. So, but I'd still put my price a little lower than that rake cost. So 10% of the prize pool divided by the amount of experience in the whole race.
You had that number, didn't you? You didn't have it figured out?
I started figuring it out a couple of weeks back, and then they did the rake announcement, and I was like, well, that goes out the window.
Kevin, any other thoughts here on this XP conversation?
No, he started talking about XP deferrals and stuff, and I feel like I need an accountant, but it's very interesting. I like that thought about optimizing the XP and using it for a horse you want to accelerate, and then holding a horse, especially as these conditionals blow up, like you said. So that's super interesting. And I would echo what you said. Anytime we can add more strategy in this game, more user control, I think it's needed. So coupling that with the economic benefits, just a more robust economy, I think it could be a slam dunk if implemented correctly.
Yeah. Well, we're just going to apply all of our XP to RSB to get him back ahead of
yeah.
That's going to be the next one.
You think you guys will be net buyers or net sellers?
Gosh, I don't. It depends on the price, right? That's the ultimate question. I don't think we're going to have so much.
We're self-sustained. We'll definitely be using it. Like we will be consuming it, but we will be probably swapping in-house mostly.
Yeah, if it's insanely cheap, right? We'll step in and buy the floor.
Right. I feel like a lot of us are going to be net buyers because we do have a lot of time. We either have to pay somebody to race the horses, some of them, right? Like our second tier of horses. You can only race so many, but there's still like a lot of strong horses in the second tier, especially for you guys. Your second tier is most people's super top tier. So, to get those through certain thresholds, I feel like there's a benefit.
Yeah. Now, if the Iranian sheiks come in and they want to pay us, $10 per 100 XP, we'll probably sell all.
Yeah, and it'll be an interesting balance between where you end up breeding a horse versus how much XP it costs to get to that level. So, yeah, that'll be an interesting dynamic as well, and probably a reason to. Then you can cost out the real difference between the premium breeds too, right? Like, getting those extra levels with the Nakamotos has a price difference there.
Yeah. Fun times ahead. One last quick topic of discussion here before we wrap it up. We got a little bit of time left. So Kevin, you and I had this chat in just in our DMs earlier this week, because I heard it a couple times, people talking about how distance preference really doesn't have any value at all anymore. I think Roid Rager kind of alluded to something along these lines on that AMA with Facundo last week. And then Shady Lane was talking about it in a thread that, which is kind of where I brought to you. I'm like, do I just not understand how distance preference works? I don't know. And it turns out I didn't really understand it as well as I should have. So maybe you guys can give a little kind of refresher on exactly how distance preference works in the racing algorithm to your understanding, and why does distance preference still have incredible value in the new meta without down classers, right? Because I think that is what that's kind of the echo chamber. That's what it's saying now, is like down classers are gone. There's really no difference between a horse that doesn't have distance preference and a horse that has really strong distance preference, which I think, Kevin, you disagree with, right?
Yeah. Souls, what are your thoughts? I'm curious. I don't think we've ever talked about distance preference.
Damn, I was curious about your thoughts.
Well, I already kind of spoiled a little bit of his thoughts.
Yeah, well, man. So wait, I got to go first. All right. Yeah, it's a very interesting, and I do see both sides of it. I think that it will end up mattering tremendously, but where it ends up mattering, I don't necessarily know. But like the exact amount, I'm not 100% sure on, because distance preference certainly makes your horse faster than base ability, right? Otherwise, it would just be base ability. So we know that much. So now if you want to have the best, like say double up horse, or even any horse, right? Like you want to have the maximum amount of distance preference compared to base ability for the exact distance you're running at. Now, I guess the argument is, well, however much you have, that's the distance you run at, but that's not necessarily true. I think there's going to be an optimal amount for each distance to put you like, this is the fastest 2000, this is the fastest 1000, this is the fastest 26. And once the beasts are out from 1.0, I think then it's going to make a huge difference, because those are going to be the 2600. The more you have, the better you are out at the extremes. Yeah, so I would say it does matter where those cutoffs happen. That I don't know.
Yeah, I think I agree. The big thing for me is comes down to base ability, and with like the pie theory of the more distance preference you have, you're typically sacrificing some base ability, because you can only have so much distance preference variance base ability. So it is the balance of, you have these horses that have a touch of marathon distance preference, but they're actually best at 1800 because they don't have the distance preference to compete at 26, but they have more base ability than those 26ers at 18. So when they're not getting that big distance preference multiplier, they're actually better, and then they're better than the true 1600s because they're close in base ability and they get a little boost from DP. So I almost think of it as like, it's almost like a multiplier based on where you are in the distance spectrum, on top of your base ability. So like if you have a significant marathon distance preference, you're going to feel that multiplier heavier at 2600 than you are at 18, but you're going to have a lower base ability to start. So that multiplier is going to be off a much smaller base at 1800, where you're not going to look as good. And then that's really just for like median speed. And then you have your variance element, which is going to show up a lot more in the like 12 gate races. Whereas if it's head to head, it's really just base ability and give me base ability, give me a bunch of distance preference, and then you're just going to want to run on average as fast as you can.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys have lost most of the audience here in this conversation.
I mean, the one part I think a lot of people don't look at though is breeding and the fall off. So if you don't care about distance preference at all, like there's going to be this hard consolidation to 1600 each generation down the line. So like by starting out at the very highest, you can keep your horses further out. And right now it doesn't seem like that matters, but as we get, if you took out all the 1.0 horses, it really does matter, because to have extreme distance preference at that point just with 2.0 and 3.0, it's like it's pretty rare. It's just like having like rare variants, and those are going to be the best horses at their distance. So yeah, I think.
Well, and we also don't know. We also don't know what super breeds are going to look like. I mean, I think they're going to be. I think you could max out distance preference just like kind of you could have in 1.0, right?
Get that Artois.
Yeah, it seemed like it, right?
Yeah. So I think I'm sure some diehards probably followed along with this conversation, but you guys didn't really give that foundation response of how distance preference is functioning in the racing algorithm, because I think that's a key piece to this conversation here. So, Kevin, can you give a little bit of color to that? First of all, how did it work prior to the adjustment that was made in August of 2021, which really was a fundamental change to how racing worked, right? And then how does it work now? Because I think that will add a little bit of context to everything that you and Souls just kind of shot here from your expert level of understanding of all this stuff.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the spook chain, as people affectionately call it. And it's people who know more than I do about this. But my interpretation was basically you had a race roll where basically the RNG within the race decided if it was going to be a marathon race or an inverted roll. And what would happen was the horses with the most distance preference would always finish ahead of horses with a little less distance preference. And you would see it in the odds era where horses would flash at, I think it was 45 were the odds. And that literally meant 0% chance at winning. And you would see super low odds. I mean, Souls, you know this better than anybody with Moulah, where it would just be like sometimes in the twos, where it actually meant you were winning like half the time. And that's because anytime it was a marathon race and there was another horse that also had that same distance preference, you were automatically winning. They could not beat you. And on the other end, you would see inverted rolls where you had Princess of Power winning 20% of the time at marathon because they were the best sprint, or they were the best marathoner in a sprint race. So anytime they got the inverted roll, they were the one winning as a marathoner in a sprint. So that's how it used to work. Does that align with what you guys understood?
Yeah, yep, that's exactly.
Didn't mean to bring up any fresh wounds.
The wound will never heal.
No.
And then, so Kevin, now can you explain how it works in the new era after August of 2021?
Yeah, I mean, my read simply now is it's a much more independent role where each horse has their own like average speed, and I think ZSim is what I use typically to illustrate this. Is they have their average speed at a distance, and then from there, that's typically a mixture of distance preference and base ability that I was talking about. And there's some scale where the farther you get from 1600, the more your distance preference gets multiplied into that factor. But then you have basically a variance, which is just a standard deviation speed is how they show it on ZSim, where if you get that top, 30% roll, that's one standard deviation up from the mean, and that's your speed. And if you get that roll and everybody else gets an average roll, you're going to win that race. So it's a much more independent space, but distance preference still matters because that's how you get the average speed coupled with your base ability, and then your variance can kick in and decide if you beat the horses in that race or not independently, rather than having a race that's all right, a marathoner is going to win this. So spook chain, half the horses are screwed.
And so to dumb it down as much as I possibly can here, essentially the way that I understand it from the way you guys have explained it to me is the stronger your distance preference is, the more it kind of amplifies. It's a multiplier on base ability at the further out distances. So of course it's advantageous to have strong distance preference, right? Because you're getting an advantage over all other horses that have lesser distance preference, right? That's the value if we simplify it, right?
Exactly. So you want the horse that has the biggest multiplier. So you can, as long as like relatively speaking, it's bigger than the other horses in that race, you're going to benefit. If it's not, then you'd probably be better off kind of nerfing those super DP horses a little bit by racing at like 22 or 24, and then anchoring more heavily on your base ability because maybe your mean speed is better at that distance because distance preference doesn't play as big of a factor.
And so I think that this is what Souls was getting at is it's true to a certain extent because right now in breeding 3.0 without super breeds, you can't breed an RSB distance preference, right? Because distance preference is passing down the same as it was in breeding 2.0. So there is some truth at this point in time that breeding for distance preference, you're not going to be able to compete with the RSBs of the world right now, but eventually they'll age out. Eventually you'll have super breeds and be able to get it. And so I think that's what you were kind of alluding to, Souls, that you see both sides.
Yeah, and I mean the other side is people are saying that regardless of your distance preference, right, you're going to end up somewhere on, like, in a sense, if I don't care that I'm racing at 1600 or I'm racing at 2200, right? I don't care what distance I race at. I just want to make money. Like, people are saying, well, if I have zero distance preference, then I just race at 1600. And if I have X distance preference, I just race at 22. And if I have this sprint distance preference, I just race at 1000. I don't care where I race. I'm just going to race. And then variance. So like your BA chooses where in the class system you are level, right? And then distance preference just chooses your distance. And then variance chooses how much you, or what type of race that you race.
But the dominance is the kind of missing factor, right? You get an RSB distance preference with that base ability. Like that's why RSB is so dominant, right?
Yeah. And I mean, some people might say, well, it's a combination of the three with the variance, right? And like, if you got no distance preference, then you have, no variance, then you have LBJ Goat or Moulah or whatever, like some, I don't know.
Do we know if variance is in the leveling? Have they come out with that yet? Because I'm just thinking of like comparing Artois to RSB, who are virtually like the same average speed, but then and they're also the same level. But RSB just has a big variance advantage, which is why he plays better in the winning scenarios. But head to head, they're virtually the same. If you like race them, I think if you looked, it's almost 50-50. And that they are the same level. So like, is variance in that equation? Do we know?
It's just base ability. They've said it's just base ability, right, Souls?
Well, when you level up, I think, Kevin, your question was in
total level. They're
in
both
your starting
16.
level, did variance
gotcha.
add levels to
Yes.
it? I mean, I think it did, because just the way we see some horses, it doesn't seem like it was zero, but
just wasn't big.
I think it's very small if it's in there.
It does seem small when you're comparing, a lot of horses. So some people say, well, but then on the other hand, you could say that almost variance doesn't necessarily matter, because if you have no variance, you just race double ups, and if you have a ton of variance, then you race, winner take all. So
this may be for a different episode. I know we're running long, donkey. Sorry to do this to you.
That's all good. Your guys' time is the valuable time.
I think the RSB Artois case is super interesting. A, because they're the closest to 700 we have right now, and they're the exact same distance preference or close to it, and they're truly peers, but they're different archetypes. Yeah. And if you look at their speeds and everything, their average speed is almost exactly the same. So you can kind of extrapolate. Let's assume they go to 700 and they level up the same. If that's what happens, so head to head, they're going to win 50% each because their average speed is the same, roughly. But RSB, no offense, Wagme, will be a better horse because it's more versatile in having that upside run. What Artois can do is when it's racing against inferior horses, its stability doesn't let it sink down and fall in the bottom half of those inferior horses. Like it's always, because it's bottom 25% run, is still better than at that point, better than a 550s, one of their best runs. So RSB is more variance, so they can taper off and lose to some of those more inferior horses if it's a bottom 25% run. But In game, we're talking they're all going to be 700 level horses all around that same average speed. Then all of a sudden, it's not a double up horse. It's a very average horse that is banking on other horses to fail to double up because the average speed is all the same across the board. So in game, I think it's actually not going to be that good. But while others are trying to catch up, it's going to be dominant.
Yeah, and even when you get out there, if it has more, that's where the distance preference will come into play. Like if you have more distance preference, like you're going to have a faster.
Yes, at 26, yeah.
Yeah, at 26, right? So, and you're going to be the double. Like
right. Artois is a like top of the line example. I'm thinking more like these horses that have no variance and not a ton of distance preference that people are just banking on getting level 700 and being a double up master. It's only going to be a double up master if it's leveled higher than horses it's racing against at a comparable distance preference. Otherwise, it's going to look very average because it doesn't have an upside run to finish in that top 3. So you're just banking on others to fail.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what people are thinking. But I think that if you have the just a little more distance preference, you're going to be that split second faster. And maybe
and the reality is you're not going to have perfectly efficient races. There are always going to be horses who are racing a little suboptimal. So if you truly figure out your horse and can race it where it needs to be raced, you can get that edge back. Or you just buy XP and make sure you're the highest level horse.
But I am excited to see how it pans out with RSB and Artois.
Yeah, it's a good case study at this point.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Any final comments here on this discussion?
I think we've covered it.
Yeah, I think it was a great show. Lots of great information in there. All right. Well, Souls, we will have you back on anytime that you're available. And Kevin, I'll talk to you next week. All right, man.
All right. See you guys.
Later, guys.
Okay.